those young people, those rising young people, going to the youth department. I have some grandkids that have lamented the fact that fifth graders can't go to Fall Street. And so usually whenever they turn and go to the sixth grade, rising to go, I guess they're already in the sixth grade, they really look forward to going to Fall Street. And so now those young ones are in youth department. Any other announcements that we need to make this morning? Okay. Well, this morning we are studying Serve with Loyalty. And it's a continuing as we look at the life of Elijah and his walking with the Lord and following the Lord's directions in his life. So at the outset, let me just show where this is going to take place. Here is Mount Carmel. It is right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Can you see from over there? Right here, right on the edge of it. And so Samaria is here, and that was where the capital of the northern kingdom and where King Ahaz was living. His father, Omri, bought the land and built this city, and it became, like our Washington, D.C., it became the capital of the northern kingdom. All that's in the green was the northern kingdom. And so we're going to do some flashbacks today to try to understand a little bit better about what was happening in the northern kingdom. But today's episode takes place on Mount Carmel, and where they had up on the mountain, and one writer says they probably, or he did say probably, he said they may have actually carried this out not from the top of the mountain, but down lower on the mountain, or even at the base of the mountain where there's a larger place for people to gather. So we have seen now Elijah go to the king Ahab and tell him that a drought was coming because he had abandoned and was not worshiping the Lord God. And then Elijah fled across the river Jordan to an area where there was just a dry stream bed, I believe it's called Cherith. And there, God said, I will give you water to drink from this stream bed and food to eat that the ravens will bring you morning and night. So he was there for a while. We know it wasn't just a few days, but whenever the drought began getting severe, the water in the stream dried up, of course. And so the Lord told him then, go across from this area where he was, and go across all the way to Phoenicia, Zarephath, up here, which is some distance. Probably took him at least 3 or 4 days to walk that far. And he said, I have commanded, or I have told, or I have directed a woman there in Zarephath that she will take care of you while you are there. And you'll remember the story, how he went to Zarephath. Outside the gate, he saw a woman gathering sticks, and he asked her for a cup of water. And so as she was going to get a cup of water, he said, also bring me a piece of bread. To which she replied, sir, I only have enough flour and enough oil to make one more loaf of bread for me and my son, and then we will die from hunger. And he said, lady, don't worry about it. God will provide. You will never run out of flour, and you will never run out of meal, and you will never run out of oil until it rains. And so she responded. He said, make me a loaf first, and then you can make a loaf for you and your son. Which she did. so she had enough flour and oil for 2 people, right? But it said every day until the drought subsided, she never ran out of meal or flour to make the bread and oil to make it with. And so during that, then last week, you remember, her son became ill and died. And so with an accusatory question, she asked Elijah, so did you come here to expose my sins so that I would face judgment of God and my son die? And so Elijah took the son in his arms, carried him up to his upper room, and there he prayed for God to give him his life back. And God did give him his life back. His life was restored, and he took the child back to the woman. Now, before we begin, and I assume that you've already read and studied today's lesson, but what kind of faith, what kind of experiences do you think, and do you think they had anything to do with what we find Elijah facing and doing in today's episode? It's a question I have. Was this also a faith-building time for Elijah? Did he come to see in a new way how God would provide for him and would take care of him and protect him? Just keep those in mind, because I think it definitely had a faith-building time in Elijah's life. So let's look this morning at 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 20 through 21. 20 through 26 and 31 through 39. God values the loyalty of his people. Many who claim to be his followers run hot and cold in their faithfulness to God. It's almost as though they say to God, "What have you done for me lately?" God deserves our unwavering allegiance and loyalty always, no matter the circumstances. Obedience to the one who loves us is a testimony of our commitment to Christ. And so the setting here is after 3 years of drought, 3 years, God directed Elijah to present himself to King Ahab again. The king and his trusted God-fearing servant Obadiah, that's a story into itself that's covered in the scriptures, but Obadiah was a God-fearing, Jehovah God-fearing servant. But the king and Obadiah divided the land to search for Elijah. God arranged events so they were searching for water. And in the searching for water, Obadiah found Elijah. But what they had divided was, the king said, let's search for water. You go north, I'll go south, or wherever, as they divided the land. God arranged events so Obadiah's and Elijah's paths crossed. Elijah charged Obadiah to return to Ahab and tell him that Elijah wanted to meet him. Concerned the Lord might call Elijah elsewhere, Obadiah hesitated. Actually, he objected, fearing Ahab's reaction might result in Obadiah's execution. You see, go back and say, hey, king, I found Elijah, he wants to meet you. And then they go to where Elijah's supposed to meet them, and if he's not there, it's Obadiah's neck. So Elijah assured Obadiah he would remain to confront Ahab that very day. And so Obadiah went and found King Ahab and told him, I found Elijah. He wants to meet you. He will meet you at certain place. And so Ahab then went to meet Elijah. So we look in the scriptures, 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 20 through 21. In this, we do not cover the episode about Obadiah. If you want to read that, you need to read the first part of 1 Kings chapter 18. But we pick this up as Ahab comes to meet Elijah. And Elijah says to him, summon all the prophets of Baal and of Ashtaroth, and bring them all together at Mount Carmel. Now that's prior to what we're going to see here. So let's read verses 20 and 21 together. So Ahab summoned all the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Then Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him." But the people didn't answer him a word. So Ahab not only summoned all the prophets, he summoned the people too. Now, Elijah had become well known, I'm sure, in the northern kingdom. The word had gone out that Elijah had prophesied that there would be a drought until he said it would rain. And for 3 years, this northern kingdom suffered a colossal drought. 3 years without rain. You know, whenever we go through a drought here, it's like a year and we're hurting, right? 2 years, we are really in bad shape, and we've been there before. But 3 years is phenomenal. They didn't have dams and lakes like we do today. They had natural lakes, but still, the streams had dried up. Many of the springs had dried up. And so they were really hurting for water. You can't do without water. You can go without food quite a while. But without water, about 3 days is all you can last. And so the name Elijah was well known. So when Ahab summons all the people, and he tells them, he sends out messengers to all the villages and the cities and all the areas to tell the people, come to Mount Carmel. Elijah's going to be there. The prophets of Baal are going to be there. And they are going to have a contest to see who is really God. And so perhaps Ahab with confidence says, come and watch him fall on his face. Come and watch Elijah fail. He's the one that's prophesied this, but come and watch him fail. But already there was a fly in the ointment. They knew that Elijah had prophesied, it will not rain until I say so. And here was this enormous, destructive drought. They knew that. And so when Ahab may have said, come and watch him fail, in the back of their mind, there surely must have been a think. You think so? Don't know. Let's go see. This ought to be something else. And so Elijah then approached all the people. Now notice when they gathered here, it wasn't just the prophets and Ahab that were there. There was a huge group of northern kingdom people. People that perhaps were followers of Baal, and perhaps even some followers of Jehovah God. They just hadn't made it known. Obadiah was likely there, and it says very clearly that he was a follower of Jehovah God. In fact, he tells Elijah, look, Elijah, don't you know about me? I saved, was it 150 prophets of God, and hid them in a cave while Ahab was trying to have them all killed, and Jezebel was trying to have them all killed, and I fed them during the time that they were hiding. That came out whenever Elijah met Obadiah in the early part of chapter 18. And so Elijah challenges the people. If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. But notice the people didn't answer him a word. Why didn't they answer? Well, the king was sitting right there. And for them to say, yeah, we believe in Yahweh God, that would have been an affront to the king. I mean, there's many reasons. Even the Baalites did not answer. They didn't say a word. They were all quiet. And so Elijah had their attention. Another important thing, or interesting thing here, Ahab was the king, but we don't find the king speaking to the people. Elijah is in charge here. He says, gather the people, gather the prophets, and here they are. And then he addresses them. It doesn't say that the Baalites, the priests of Baal, addressed the people. This was, in essence, Elijah's show. And so he stood before them. He was the commanding figure in this presentation. And he challenges them, make a decision, quit wavering, quit jumping back and forth, quit being hesitant about what you believe. Be certain. And if Yahweh God is God, then let's follow him. If Baal is God, then let's follow him. And so it's a very clear contest, a very clear confrontation between those worshiping Baal and those worshiping Jehovah God. Any questions or any thoughts here? One other thing that this writer points out is it took several days for Ahab to call all the people together, send out notices that there was going to be a gathering on a certain date at Mount Carmel and for them to come and be there. What did Elijah do during that time?
Right?
Yeah, I'm sure. He prepared, don't you imagine? He knew that there was a contest coming. He knew that, he had made a pronouncement to Ahab and then fled. He had fled to Zarephath up in the Phoenician area where Jezebel had come from and hid there. But now he was coming out in the open, and he's going to be in front of a large crowd. What, 250? Or how many priests of Baal were there?
450.
450 priests of Baal. I mean, he could have considered, with 450 against one, what chance would he have if they attacked him? If this large crowd of people came and they were angry at him for the drought, could have been, he wouldn't stand a chance unless God was on his side. And so when they came, evidently, there was no rabble-rousing. There was nothing being said against him. He was in command against the opposition, which was perhaps 1,000, perhaps 2,000, perhaps 5,000 people that had gathered there to hear the words of Elijah and to see this contest. They didn't know what the contest. They didn't even know perhaps it was going to be a contest. But for Elijah to come and speak to them all was surely a momentous occasion. And they didn't want to miss it. And so Elijah surely had prepared in prayer, Lord, what do I do whenever I go here? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? And so Elijah challenges them when he says, if Baal is God, follow him. If Jehovah God is God, then follow him. He tells them, take a stand. Don't try to mix both. And evidently, they were trying to mix both, what's called syncretism. Taking more than one philosophical or one belief and trying to mix them together and make them okay. Americans are much like that. Trying to mix together many different beliefs and still saying that they are Christians, following Jesus, but only on Sunday, or only partially, but mixing in all of the other gods in our society, materialism and populism and all the other things that consume our time and our energy. So let's look at some questions. What decision did Elijah call from the people? He called them to make a decision between the false god and the true God, between Baal and between Jehovah God. And how did they answer him?
Not a word.
With silence. Yeah, with silence. Why do you think Elijah noted he was the only prophet of the Lord while the prophets of Baal numbered 450?
That's all God needed.
True. That's all God needed was one person. Well, we find later on, in probably next Sunday's episode, that God says, oh no, you're not alone. There are many others, and actually gives a number in Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal. But
7,000.
But Elijah had not heard that yet. And for sure, at this episode, Elijah was the only prophet there and the only one speaking. Describe Elijah's plan to help the people see the Lord as God. It was to set up a confrontation, wasn't it? A clear confrontation, where there could be no doubt as to who was the real God. So some lessons here. Every person has a decision to make to follow the Lord God or something else. Every person has that decision to make. Actually, to not choose the Lord is to reject him. There is no middle ground. You can't be part Christian and part something else. You are either Christian or not. You are a believer and follower of Christ, or you are not. The strength of the Lord is not in numbers, but in who he is as sovereign, powerful, creator, controlling God. Part of our witness as believers is to challenge others to see evidence of the power of God around them and in the things that he does. So then let's look at 1 Kings 8:22 through 26. Now it's actually 2 slides, so just stay with me. We're going to keep reading all of it, okay? Let's read together. Then Elijah said to the people, I am the only remaining prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us. They are to choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, and place it on the wood, but not light the fire. I will prepare the other bull and place it on the wood, but not light the fire. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers with fire, he is God. And all the people answered, fine. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, since you are so numerous, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first. Then call on the name of your God, but don't light the fire. So they took the bull that he gave them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, Baal, answer us. But there was no sound. No one answered. Then they danced around the altar they had made. So as we look at this, we see the same description of the contest mentioned twice. The first time is to whom? Who did Elijah first speak to in verse 26?
I guess the prophets of Baal.
No,
Okay. The people.
he talked to the people. So he turns to the people. Now, I don't know if they were separated, but I imagine the prophets of Baal had gathered over in one area. And he turns to the people and he says, this is what we're going to do. He says to the people, and he explains to them what he is proposing. And he says, there's just 1 prophet of the Lord here, and 450 prophets of Baal. let 2 bulls be given to us. And they are to choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, put it on the plate of wood. But the condition was not light the fire. And then he says, I will prepare the other bull, place it on wood, but not light the fire. And then you call on the name of your God. Notice he uses the possessive here. Your God. They had made their own gods. They constructed their own idols. They owned them. I mean, if you went in their house and took one of their idols, they'd say, give me my idol back. Give me my God back. They owned their gods. But notice what he says. And then you, and I will call on the name of the Lord. He doesn't say my Lord. He says the Lord. There is a difference here in what he says. You call on your God, and I'll call on Yahweh God. You see, we don't own God. He owns us. We didn't make God. He made us. And so there's a difference in possessive pronouns here. There is none whenever Jehovah God is mentioned. But there is a possessive pronoun mentioned whenever he mentions the prophet, the gods of Baal. And actually, the word God here, it's translated here as just one God, God. But actually, the word is a plural word. You call on the name of your gods is actually what he said. And it's not translated that way. And I will call on the name of the Lord. And we'll see who answers first. Answers with fire. He is God. The God who answers with fire, we will know he is God. And the people all answered, that's fine. Now the word fine, I don't like that in this translation. It means, okay, kind of. But actually what they said is, that's good. Let's do it that way, is what their answer really was. That's fine can also mean that, but it can also have other colorations. But that's good, is what they said. And then Elijah turns to the prophets of Baal. After he's already told the people, now they've heard it, I'm sure, they were standing right there. But then he turns to the prophets of Baal and he says, since you are so numerous, you choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first. Now he was giving them first place. They owned the field, and this was a home game for them. And they got first choice. They could choose whichever bull they wanted. They could prepare it however they wanted. They could put it on build the firewood and stack it however they wanted. But the condition was, don't light the fire. And the implication is that whenever they would offer sacrifices in their Baal temple, they would light their fire. Though their God was the God of fire, they would light the fire for their sacrifices. And we might remember that Mount Carmel, was the mountain considered the mountain of Baal. And so the site that Elijah had chosen was a site already that these prophets were familiar with. And he was challenging them in the area where their God was supposed to be powerful. Rain, thunder, and lightning. In other words, fire from heaven. He chose those very things, those very ways that Baal was supposed to be proficient and powerful and the true God. And he said, let's see. It hadn't rained in 3 years. And let's see if your God will produce fire to accept the sacrifice. And so the prophets of Baal in verse 26, they took the bull that he gave them, prepared it, called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, Baal, answer us. What else could they say? But there was no sound. And there was no one that answered them. And so then they danced around the altar. I mean, the word danced here means jumped around, leaped around, limped around. They were doing anything they could. They danced on the altar, off the altar, all around. Can't you imagine what a spectacle it was for 450 priests to be jumping around and praying and jumping on the altar and waving their hands and hollering, Baal answer us, Baal answer us. Not just for 10 minutes, not just for 30 minutes, but for hours. In the morning and until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they gave up. And so they had essentially failed. And Baal had failed them as well. Let's look at some questions. To whom did Elijah turn his attention first?
The people.
The people. It was the people that he was trying to convince and convict. Why might he have been comfortable letting the prophets of Baal go first? What if Baal had answered first? Well, the contest would be over, wouldn't it? But Elijah knew Baal was a false god. He wanted them to fail first. And then he could succeed as God would answer. What did they do in their efforts to get Baal to respond with fire? Everything they could think of, except lighting the fire. Jumped around, leapt around, danced around, raised their hands, hollered, screamed, everything they could do. But brothers and sisters, every false god is a false god. They don't hear, they don't answer, they don't respond, they don't comfort, they don't strengthen, they give no help at all. And the things that we give our time and our energy to that is not Jehovah God and that we place first in our lives, these things will all fail. They cannot meet our spiritual, emotional, physical needs. Only Jehovah God. And He hears us, He answers us, and He provides the care that we need. Yes, ma'am.
The Sunday school book says that they may have self-inflicted injury to themselves also.
Yeah. And that's just, speculation, but cutting themselves, yeah. Whatever they can do to get His attention. Whatever they do. And what response did they get?
No.
Nothing. Yeah. A false god, an idol, something that you made yourself, it can't answer you. It can't help you. So some lessons from this passage. How sad that anyone would look to false, unreliable, or unresponsive things for answers to critical concerns. How pitiful it is, how sad it is that people will give themselves to false gods and not to the one true God. False gods, whatever they may be, will fail every time. So then the last passage. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel will be your name. And he built an altar with the stones in the name of the Lord. And then he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 4 gallons of water. Next he arranged the wood, cut up the bull, placed it on the wood, and said, fill 4 water pots with water, and pour it on the offering to be burned and on the wood. After they had done that, he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And then he said a third time, and they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar. He even filled the trench with water at the time for offering the evening sacrifice, about 3 in the afternoon. the prophet Elijah approached the altar and said, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel today, let it be known that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that at your word I have done all these things. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so that this people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. And then the Lord's fire fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust. And it licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell face down and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, Yahweh, He is God. So let's look at this. Why did He take 12 stones? What did that represent?
12 tribes.
12 tribes of Israel. That's right. And why this is the sons of Jacob. But what name does He use later in place of Jacob?
Is it Israel?
Israel. That's right. Israel will be your name. You remember? The word of the Lord had come saying, Israel will be your name. And what was the name of their country? Israel. The other was called Judah, but this was called Israel. So the 12 stones represent the 12 tribes. Now, not all 12 tribes was in Israel. One tribe, David's tribe, the tribe of Judah, was where the other king, it was Asa at the time, who was the king of Judah. And so he ties it back to the Old Testament, to the 12 tribes of Israel who were delivered from the land of Egypt, through the Red Sea, at Mount Sinai, where the stream came from the rock, where God provided the manna, where God provided the light by night and the cloud by day to guide the people, where He brought them into the land of Israel, and they could conquer the land and claim it as their own, though it was not theirs at that time. That's what He's referring to. The 12 tribes of Israel. It is a whole. It is a complete group that God had brought in, and they had turned against this powerful, omnipotent God. He built an altar of 12 stones, and He named it He gave it the name of the Lord. And so then He did something that He did not demand from the Baalites, from the priests of Baal. He trenched around the altar. And then He commanded that they bring jars of water and pour it on the sacrifice. Did the Baalites do that? No. That was not a condition. But He did it. 4 jars, big jars of water to pour on the sacrifice. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. So that the ground became wet, the sacrifice all became wet, the wood all became wet, and the water ran off and filled the trench around the sacrifice. And then at the time of the evening sacrifice, which is 3 p.m., Prophet Elijah approached the altar and said, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and he didn't say Israel, it didn't say Jacob here, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. He put them within God's arms. To the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel today, let it be known that you are God in Israel. I am your servant. That's the second request. And that at your word I have done all these things. There's 3 requests. Answer me, Lord. Answer me. And that's the 4th request that he makes to the Lord. 4 requests. Answer me, Lord, so that this people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. And then the Lord's fire fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when the people saw it, they fell face down and said, the Lord, He is God. Now can you imagine leading up to this? As Elijah approaches the sacrifice and the priests of Baal are sitting to the side and they are sad because nothing fell from heaven for them. They heard no words, no answers to their cries. And I can just hear them. He's going to fail too. Nothing's going to happen. This has just been a useless episode. We're still going to win because he's not going to see anything happen. And then when they started pouring the water on, they said, for sure, there's no way. There's no way. We're all safe. Baal's going to protect us here. But when the fire fell, and the sacrifice was consumed, the people, it doesn't say the prophets of Baal bowed, but the people bowed down and proclaimed again and again the Lord. And the word Lord here is the word Yahweh or Jehovah. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is God, not Baal. They didn't say that, but that's exactly what they meant. Baal is not God. Yahweh is a powerful God. He is our God. This is just one episode in Elijah's life. And I asked you a question at the beginning. God telling him to go speak to Ahab and say, a drought is coming, now run. And he ran to Cherith, to this dry stream bed where God sent him. And God said, I'll provide water for you, and the ravens will bring food for you. And he saw it happen day after day after day after day. And then God tells him, go across to Zarephath, to Phoenicia, where Jezebel came from. He knew that. And there's a woman there that I've instructed. That's the only thing that God told him. There's a woman there that I've instructed to take care of you. And when he gets to the gate, he sees this widow out there gathering sticks. Now, if I had been in his place, I would have thought, there's some rich lady that's going to take care of me. There was no rich lady there. This was as poor as could be. She did own a home, but she had no money. She had no food. And she told him that. I have no food, just enough for me and my son to eat one more meal, and then we will die. And he, under the inspiration of God, said, don't worry, God will take care of you. Your food will not run out. Your oil will not go away. You will have enough until the drought is past. How did that help his faith grow? And then the son that died, and he carried him to the upper room, and there he said, Lord, did you send me here to bring destruction upon this woman? Lord, restore this child's life. And God saw this child, and Elijah saw this child revived. What do you think that would do to his faith? These episodes of faith building were before he stood at Mount Carmel. Maybe Elijah didn't need that. We have no instructions about that. But I know if it were me, I would say, look at what he's done for me to this point. He's sent me before the tyrant to speak. He has hid me and fed me where no one else could come. He sent me to the poorest woman in Zarephath and provided food and oil for us to live for those almost 3 years of drought. And he was there probably at least 2.5 of it. And then the son dies, and God raises this child from the dead